The morning sun cast long shadows across the Brooklyn cemetery as Steve Rogers knelt before a weathered headstone. Sarah Rogers, beloved mother, the inscription read. 23 years had passed since her death, yet the pain still cut through him like winter wind through thin cloth. He placed a single white rose on the grave, his enhanced hearing picking up the distant sounds of the city awakening. But here, in this quiet corner of his past, time seemed frozen. "I made it, Ma," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Just like I promised." The shield rested against his knee, its polished surface reflecting the cemetery's ancient oaks, vibranium and steel, forged in fire and tempered by sacrifice. It had saved countless lives, deflected bullets meant for innocence, and carried the hopes of a nation. Yet today, it felt impossibly heavy. Steve's phone buzzed. Nick Fury's name flashed on the screen. He let it ring, knowing what it meant. Another mission, another crisis that demanded Captain America's attention. The world never slept, and neither could its sentinel. Rising slowly, Steve dusted off his knees and picked up the shield. As he strapped it to his arm, the familiar weight settled into place like an old friend returning home. But friends didn't demand everything you had to give. Friends didn't ask you to carry the world on your shoulders until your bones ached with exhaustion. The walk back to his motorcycle took him past children playing in a nearby park. Their laughter echoed off the playground equipment, pure and untainted by the knowledge of what lurked in the shadows of their world. A little girl with pigtails waved at him from the swings, her gap-toothed smile bright as sunshine. He waved back, forcing his own smile to match hers. This was why he fought. For moments like these, for the right of children to play without fear, to grow up in a world where their biggest worry was whether their ice cream would melt before they finished it. The thought should have filled him with purpose, renewed his strength. Instead, it reminded him of everything he'd lost along the way. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Natasha. The text was simple. Brooklyn Bridge. "Now, come alone." Steve mounted his bike and roared toward the city. Traffic parted before him like water, drivers recognizing the distinctive red, white, and blue uniform even at highway speeds. But recognition came with expectation. They saw Captain America and believed everything would be all right. They saw a symbol of hope and never questioned what it cost a man beneath the mask. The Brooklyn Bridge stretched before him like a steel rainbow against the gray sky. Natasha waited at the center, her red hair whipping in the wind. She wasn't alone. 3 figures in dark tactical gear flanked her, their faces hidden behind masks that reminded Steve of nightmares from another era. "You're late," Natasha called as he approached. "Was visiting an old friend," Steve replied, dismounting but keeping the bike between himself and the strangers. "These old friends have a proposition." Her voice carried an edge he'd learned to recognize. "Danger. They know about the serum, about what makes you tick." The tallest figure stepped forward, pulling off his mask to reveal a face Steve recognized from intelligence briefings. Dr. Marcus Webb, formerly of Advanced Idea Mechanics, now supposedly reformed and working with the government. His smile was cold as winter steel. "Captain Rogers, we need to talk." Steve's grip tightened on his shield. "I'm listening. The world is changing faster than ever. New threats emerge daily. Alien invasions, time travelers, gods walking among mortals. You can't be everywhere at once, no matter how hard you try." Webb paused, studying Steve's face. "But what if you could be? Get to the point." "We've perfected the super soldier serum. Not just replicated it, but improved it. We can create an army of Captain Americas. Hundreds of them. Thousands, if necessary. Each one as strong, as fast, as dedicated as you." The words hit Steve like a physical blow. An army of super soldiers. The very thing he'd fought against in countless battles. The nightmare scenario that kept strategists awake at night. He'd seen what happened when the serum fell into the wrong hands. Red Skull. The Winter Soldiers. Abomination after abomination born from the desire to replicate what accident and desperation had created in him. "And all we need," Webb continued, "is your cooperation. Your blood, your participation in the testing protocols. Help us create the next generation of heroes. Natasha's expression remained neutral, but Steve caught the slight shake of her head. A warning. This wasn't what it seemed. Think of it, Webb pressed. No more sleepless nights wondering if you'll be fast enough, strong enough, present enough to save everyone. No more carrying the weight of the world alone. Share the burden, Captain. Let us help you help the world. Steve looked out over the East River, watching boats navigate between the bridge supports. Each vessel followed its own course, trusted its own captain. The metaphor wasn't lost on him. For decades, he'd been the lone vessel, carrying precious cargo through dangerous waters. The responsibility had shaped him, defined him, consumed him. But at what cost? His reflection stared back at him from the shield's surface. Still young, still strong, still ready to fight. But his eyes held depths that spoke of battles fought and friends lost, of choices made in the space between heartbeats that echoed through eternity. How many more years could he carry this weight before it crushed him completely? I need time to think, Steve said finally. Webb smiled wider. Of course. But don't take too long, Captain. The world won't wait forever for its salvation. As the three figures disappeared into the crowd, Natasha moved closer. It's a trap, Steve. Has to be. Maybe. Or maybe it's exactly what they say it is. He looked at her, seeing his own exhaustion reflected in her eyes. When was the last time either of us had a full night's sleep? When did we last go a day without someone needing to be saved? That's the job. But does it have to be? The question hung between them like smoke. What if there was another way? Natasha didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew the truth, that neither wanted to speak aloud. The cost of courage wasn't just measured in scars and sleepless nights. It was measured in the gradual erosion of the self, the slow transformation from person to symbol, from man to myth. Steve mounted his bike again, the engine's roar drowning out the voice in his head that whispered of rest, of peace, of a world where Captain America wasn't needed because there were others to share the load. As he rode back toward Manhattan, the shield on his back felt heavier than ever. The Avengers compound hummed with activity as Steve entered the main briefing room. Tony Stark's holographic displays painted the air with streams of data, satellite feeds, and threat assessments. The familiar chaos of saving the world played out in real time, but today it felt different. Today, Steve saw it through the lens of Webb's offer. Cap, finally. We've got a situation in Eastern Europe. Tony didn't look up from his work, fingers dancing through holographic interfaces. 3 cities under siege by some kind of enhanced individuals. Super strength, speed, the whole package. Sound familiar? Steve's blood ran cold. On the main screen, shaky cell phone footage showed figures in military gear moving with inhuman speed through crowded streets. They weren't attacking civilians directly, but their presence alone had triggered mass panic. Store windows shattered under the pressure of fleeing crowds. Cars abandoned in the middle of roads created urban mazes of twisted metal. How many? Steve asked. 12 confirmed, possibly more. They're calling themselves the New Guard. Professional equipment, coordinated tactics. But here's the kicker. Tony flicked his wrist, and a close-up image filled the screen. The figure's face was clearly visible, unnaturally young and perfect. Facial recognition shows this guy died in Kandahar 3 years ago. Marine Corps, killed by an IED. The room fell silent except for the hum of electronics. Steve studied the image, noting the familiar look in the enhanced soldier's eyes. He'd seen that expression before, in mirrors and old photographs. The look of someone carrying more than they were meant to bear. Someone's been busy, Natasha observed, entering with a steaming cup of coffee. The question is whether this is connected to your new friends from yesterday. What new friends? Tony's head snapped up, his casual demeanor evaporating. Steve quickly briefed the team on his encounter with Webb and the offer to create more super soldiers. As he spoke, Tony's expression grew darker, his fingers working furiously at his holographic keyboard. Marcus Webb. Yeah, I know that name. Brilliant scientist, questionable ethics, and officially dead as of 6 months ago. Tony pulled up Webb's file. Car accident in Geneva. Very tragic, very convenient, very fake. So he's working in the shadows now, Steve said. The question is for who? Does it matter? The voice came from the doorway where Sam Wilson stood, still in his Falcon gear from a morning patrol. Unauthorized super soldiers are running wild in Europe. That's our immediate problem. Sam was right, but Steve couldn't shake the feeling that everything was connected. Webb's offer, the enhanced soldiers in Europe, the timing of it all. It felt orchestrated, like pieces on a chessboard being moved into position for a game he didn't understand yet. "I'll go," Steve said, reaching for his shield. "We'll go," Tony corrected. "This sounds like an Avengers-level threat." "No." Steve's voice carried an authority that made everyone stop. "This is personal. They're using the serum, or something like it. This is my responsibility." The weight of that word hung in the air. Responsibility. It had defined Steve's entire existence since the day he'd volunteered for the experiment that transformed him from a sickly kid from Brooklyn into a living weapon. Every enhanced individual who followed in his wake, for good or ill, was part of his legacy. "Steve," Sam said gently, "you didn't create those soldiers. You're not responsible for what others do with stolen science." "Aren't I?" Steve turned to face his team, his friends, the people who'd stood by him through countless battles. "The serum exists because I volunteered for it. Every copy, every variation, every twisted version that's been created since then traces back to that moment in the lab when I said yes." "That's survivor's guilt talking," Natasha said. "You can't carry the weight of every scientific advancement that came after you." But Steve was already walking toward the hangar, his mind made up. The Quinjet's engines were warming up when Tony caught up with him. "You're not doing this alone." "Tony, I appreciate." "This isn't a request." Tony's faceplate flipped up, revealing eyes that burned with determination. "You want to take responsibility for every super soldier? Fine, but I'm taking responsibility for you. That's what teams do." The flight to Europe passed in tense silence. Steve stared out at the clouds below, thinking about the choices that had led him here. In 1943, he'd been a young man desperate to serve his country, willing to try anything to join the fight against fascism. The idea that his sacrifice would echo through decades, creating new conflicts and new tragedies, had never occurred to him. Now, 70 years later, he was still dealing with the consequences of that single decision. The city of Sarajevo sprawled below them as they descended. Smoke rose from several districts, and the streets were eerily empty except for military vehicles and emergency responders. The new guard had chosen their target well. A city that had already suffered so much, where the population knew how to recognize the sound of trouble and disappear accordingly. "Energy readings are off the charts," Tony reported as they landed. "These guys aren't just enhanced, they're powered by something external. Some kind of broadcast signal." Steve felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. External power sources for super soldiers had been experimented with before, always with disastrous results. The human body wasn't meant to channel that kind of energy without proper conditioning. They found the first enhanced soldier 3 blocks from the landing zone. He was standing in the middle of an intersection, perfectly still, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. When he turned toward them, Steve saw his own face reflected in the soldier's eyes. Not literally, but the essence was the same. The burden of impossible expectations. The weight of being more than human while remaining fundamentally, tragically mortal at heart. "Stand down," Steve called out, raising his shield but not taking an aggressive stance. "We're here to help." The soldier's response was a blur of motion. He covered 30 yards in a heartbeat, his fist connecting with Steve's shield hard enough to send shockwaves through the surrounding buildings. Windows exploded outward in glittering cascades of glass. As they fought, Steve realized something that made his stomach clench with dread. The soldier was holding back, not because he lacked the power to kill, but because something was preventing him from using his full strength. He was being controlled, guided by an outside force that wanted Steve alive. This wasn't a random attack. It was a demonstration. "Cap, we've got company." Tony's voice crackled through the calm all around them. More enhanced soldiers were emerging from buildings, moving with the same eerie coordination. 12 became 20. 20 became 30. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing enemies who had been specifically designed to counter their abilities. But that wasn't what made Steve's blood run cold. It was the realization that somewhere Marcus Webb was watching this entire encounter, gathering data on how Captain America fought, how he moved, how he thought. Every punch Steve threw, every tactical decision he made, was being recorded and analyzed. They weren't just fighting enhanced soldiers. They were being studied, their abilities cataloged for future replication. As more enemies closed in around them, Steve made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his days. He reached for his phone and sent a single text message to the number Webb had given him. "We need to talk." The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Prague looked like 1,000 others Steve had infiltrated over the years. Broken windows, rusted machinery, shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. But the advanced security systems hidden in the decay told a different story. This was Webb's operation center, and Steve was walking directly into the spider's web. Tony's voice crackled in his nearly invisible earpiece. "I still think this is a terrible idea." "Noted," Steve whispered, approaching the main entrance. The heavy door stood open, an invitation that felt more like a trap with each step. Inside, the warehouse had been transformed into a high-tech laboratory that would have impressed even Stark Industries. Medical equipment hummed quietly beside computer servers that cast blue light across pristine white walls. In the center of it all stood Marcus Webb, no longer bothering with the pretense of government cooperation. "Captain Rogers, I wondered when you'd come. Your demonstration in Sarajevo was effective," Steve said, keeping his shield ready but not raised. "Those soldiers, where'd you find them?" "Find them?" Webb laughed, the sound echoing off the warehouse walls. "I made them, just like I'm going to make hundreds more. The only question is whether you'll be part of the solution or part of the problem." Webb gestured to a series of medical pods arranged along the far wall. Each one contained a figure suspended in blue-green fluid, their bodies enhanced far beyond normal human proportions. But their faces were wrong, twisted by pain even in their unconscious state. "The volunteers didn't survive the process," Webb continued conversationally. "The serum we reverse-engineered from your blood samples was too crude, too violent. It created monsters instead of heroes. But that's about to change." Steve stepped closer to the pods, his enhanced vision picking up details he wished he couldn't see. Surgical scars covered the subjects' bodies. Neural implants had been grafted directly into their skulls. These weren't volunteers anymore. They were experiments, test subjects in Webb's mad quest to recreate the super soldier program. "You're torturing them," Steve said quietly. "I'm perfecting them, the same way Dr. Erskine perfected you." Webb moved to a computer terminal, his fingers dancing across holographic displays. "The difference is, I'm not limited by ethics or oversight committees. I can push the boundaries of what's possible." A new image appeared on the main screen. It showed Steve's own medical scans, taken during routine Avengers health checks. Every cell, every enhanced organ, every impossible aspect of his physiology was laid bare in clinical detail. "Your metabolism processes energy at rates that should be impossible. Your neural pathways have been restructured to handle information faster than any computer. Your cellular regeneration happens at the molecular level, rebuilding damage almost instantly." Webb's eyes gleamed with scientific fervor. "You're not enhanced, Captain. You're evolved. The next step in human development." "I'm a fluke," Steve replied. "A 1 in a billion combination of factors that can't be replicated." "That's where you're wrong." Webb pulled up another display, this one showing detailed molecular structures that pulsed with familiar energy. "The secret isn't in your blood or your tissue samples. It's in your quantum signature. The way the serum interacted with your specific DNA created a resonance pattern that we can now reproduce." Steve felt the world shift beneath his feet. Quantum signatures were theoretical, barely understood even by the most advanced scientists. But if Webb had found a way to map and replicate the quantum-level effects of the super soldier serum, how many? Steve asked. "How many what? How many people have you killed trying to figure this out?" Webb's pause was answer enough. Steve looked around the laboratory again, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't just a research facility. It was a charnel house, a place where human lives had been consumed in service of an impossible dream. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, Webb said finally. A few hundred casualties to save millions of lives. It's simple mathematics. It's murder. It's evolution. Webb's voice rose, passion replacing his clinical detachment. Do you have any idea what's coming, Captain? The threats that are gathering beyond the stars? Galactus, Thanos, entities so powerful that even your mighty Avengers are nothing but insects to them. Steve had heard whispers of cosmic threats from contacts in other dimensions. Warnings passed through channels that existed outside normal space and time. The universe was vast and filled with dangers that dwarfed anything Earth had faced so far. We need an army, Webb continued. Not just a handful of heroes, but thousands of super soldiers. Millions, if necessary. A species-wide enhancement that gives humanity the tools it needs to survive what's coming. The terrible thing was, Steve could see the logic in it. Every battle the Avengers had fought had been won by the slimmest of margins. They'd been lucky more than skilled, saved by chance as much as planning. Against truly cosmic threats, luck wouldn't be enough. And you want me to help you perfect the process, Steve said. I want you to join me in saving our species. Webb moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Don't you see? You've been carrying this burden alone for decades. The weight of being humanity's shield against impossible odds. But it doesn't have to be that way anymore. On the screens around them, data flowed like digital water. Genetic sequences, quantum calculations, probability matrices that showed the future of human enhancement spreading across the globe. It was seductive in its scope, terrifying in its implications. Show me the volunteers, Steve said. Webb led him to another section of the warehouse, where dozens of men and women in military uniforms stood in perfect formation. They were enhanced, Steve could tell immediately, but they moved with purpose and clarity that the previous test subjects had lacked. These are the successful candidates, Webb explained. Soldiers who volunteered for the program with full knowledge of the risks. They're not as enhanced as you, but they're stable, controlled, and absolutely loyal. One of the soldiers stepped forward, a woman with the bearing of a career military officer. Captain Rogers, it's an honor. I'm Colonel Sarah Martinez, formerly of the 82nd Airborne. Formerly, I died in Syria 2 months ago. IED, just like my file says. She smiled, but there was something hollow in her expression. Dr. Webb's process gave me a second chance to serve, to be part of something larger than myself. Steve studied her face, looking for signs of coercion or mental manipulation. But Colonel Martinez seemed genuinely enthusiastic about her transformation. Her eyes held the same dedication Steve had seen in his own reflection for decades. The process isn't perfect yet, Webb admitted. The enhancement requires constant maintenance, regular injections to maintain stability. But once we have your complete genetic template, we can create permanent changes that won't require ongoing treatment. And if I refuse? Webb's expression hardened. Then the world will burn, Captain, and history will remember you as the man who could have saved humanity but chose his own comfort instead. The accusation hit harder than any physical blow. Steve thought of the children playing in the park, the innocent civilians who trusted him to protect them, the teammates who followed him into battle believing he would find a way to victory. How many people would die because he was too proud or too stubborn to share his burden? I need guarantees, Steve said slowly. Full disclosure of the process. Voluntary participation only. Independent oversight. Of course. We're not monsters, Captain. We're visionaries. But as Webb spoke, Steve's enhanced hearing picked up sounds from deeper in the warehouse. Mechanical humming, the soft whoosh of life support systems, and something else. Something that sounded disturbingly like screaming, muffled by soundproof walls. The devil was offering him everything he'd ever wanted. A world where Captain America wasn't needed because everyone could be Captain America. A universe where humanity stood on equal footing with gods and cosmic entities. All it would cost was his soul. I'll consider your offer, Steve said, backing toward the exit. But I want to see everything. Every lab, every subject, every aspect of the program. Naturally, transparency is key to building trust. Webb's smile didn't reach his eyes. Take your time, Captain. But remember, every day you delay is another day humanity remains vulnerable. As Steve walked back through the warehouse, past the pods and the screens, and the promise of a better tomorrow, he felt the weight of the shield on his back like never before. Not just the physical weight of vibranium and steel, but the moral weight of every choice he'd made and every choice he was about to make. Outside, the Prague skyline stretched before him like a photograph from someone else's life. Tony's voice crackled in his earpiece, full of concern and barely controlled worry. "Steve, talk to me. What did you find in there?" Steve looked back at the warehouse, its innocent exterior hiding horrors and miracles in equal measure. Inside, Webb was probably already preparing the next phase of his plan, confident that Captain America would eventually see reason. The terrible thing was, Steve wasn't sure he was wrong. "Tony," he said quietly, "we need to talk." The Avengers assembled in the compound's secure briefing room as Steve laid out everything he discovered. Tony's face grew progressively paler as the details emerged. Natasha remained perfectly still, her assassin's training keeping her reactions hidden. Sam paced behind his chair like a caged animal, while Bruce Banner cleaned his glasses with mechanical precision, a sure sign of rising anxiety. "So let me get this straight," Tony said when Steve finished. "Mad scientist with a god complex wants to create an army of super soldiers using your DNA, and his sales pitch is that it's for the greater good." "It's not that simple." "Actually, it is that simple." Sam stopped pacing and faced the group. "This is exactly the kind of thinking that led to the Tuskegee experiments, to Unit 731, to every medical atrocity in human history. The ends don't justify the means, no matter how noble the supposed goal." Bruce looked up from his glasses. The Banner case might disagree with that assessment. The room fell silent. Bruce rarely spoke about his transformation, the accident that had turned him into the Hulk. When he did, it was usually with bitter regret, not philosophical observations about necessary sacrifices. "Bruce," Steve said carefully, "what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about cosmic threats and impossible odds." Bruce set his glasses aside and looked directly at Steve. "I've seen what's out there in the universe. Entities that could erase our entire planet with a thought. We've been lucky so far, but luck doesn't last forever." "So you're saying Webb is right?" "I'm saying the question isn't whether he's right or wrong. It's whether we can afford to ignore the possibility that he might be right." Bruce stood and walked to the window overlooking the compound's training grounds. What if there really is something coming that we can't handle? What if the next Thanos-level threat arrives tomorrow and we're not ready? Tony's holographic displays came to life, showing threat assessments and probability calculations. The math is actually pretty disturbing. Based on the frequency of cosmic-level incidents over the past 5 years, we're statistically overdue for something catastrophic. "Math can lie," Natasha said quietly. "Statistics don't account for human nature. You give someone the power of a god, they start thinking like one. Webb's volunteers aren't stable. I've seen the micro-expressions, the subtle signs of neural conditioning. They're not enhanced soldiers. They're programmed weapons." Steve thought about Colonel Martinez and her hollow smile, the way she'd spoken about dying and being reborn, as if it were a gift rather than a tragedy. There had been something unsettling about her enthusiasm, a quality that reminded him of the fanatical devotion he'd seen in Hydra operatives. "There's something else," Steve said. "Webb knew I was coming. The attack in Sarajevo, the timing of everything. It was all orchestrated to drive me toward his offer. Someone's been feeding him intelligence about our operations." The implications hung in the air like smoke. A mole in the Avengers organization, or worse, a compromised ally feeding information to enemies unknown. Trust, already fragile in their line of work, cracked a little further. "We need to find Webb's real backers," Tony said, his fingers dancing through data streams. "This operation is too sophisticated, too well-funded to be a solo effort. Someone with serious resources is bankrolling him." "Already working on it," Natasha replied, her own tablet glowing with encrypted communications. "But it might not matter. according to satellite surveillance. Webb's been busy while we've been talking. 12 more facilities have gone online in the past 6 hours. He's accelerating the timeline. Steve felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Every moment they spent debating, more test subjects were being processed through Webb's horrific machinery. More soldiers were being transformed into living weapons with questionable free will. "There's a way to stop this," he said quietly. "I could volunteer for his program. Let him have what he wants, then sabotage it from the inside." "Absolutely not." Tony's response was immediate and final. "We don't negotiate with terrorists, and we definitely don't feed ourselves to them." "But what if he's right about the cosmic threats?" Steve stood and walked to the tactical display showing Webb's facility locations. "What if we really do need an army of enhanced individuals to survive what's coming?" "Then we find another way," Sam said firmly. "We build that army through consent and ethical practices, not through torture and coercion." "How long would that take? How many people would die while we're being ethical?" Steve turned to face his team, his friends, the people whose judgment he trusted more than anyone else's in the world. Webb's methods are horrible, but his goal might be necessary. The room erupted in argument. Tony and Sam vocally opposed any cooperation with Webb, while Bruce quietly noted the potential benefits of super soldier enhancement on a global scale. Natasha remained neutral, analyzing the situation from every angle with cold professional detachment. In the middle of the chaos, Steve's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Phase 2 begins at midnight. You have until then to decide. Choose wisely." Attached was a video file. Steve opened it and immediately wished he hadn't. The footage showed a city under attack, but not by Webb's controlled super soldiers. These were different, clearly unstable, their enhanced bodies barely containing the power coursing through them. They moved through downtown San Francisco like living tornadoes, their rampage leaving destroyed buildings and terrified civilians in their wake. "Turn on the news," Steve said, his voice cutting through the argument. The breaking news banner read, "Enhanced individuals attack San Francisco." The footage was shaky, filmed by civilians on cell phones, but the devastation was clear. 6 figures, moving with superhuman speed and strength, were systematically destroying the city's financial district. "Those aren't Webb soldiers," Natasha observed, studying the attackers' movements. "They're uncontrolled, probably unstable test subjects from earlier experiments." Tony's fingers flew across holographic keyboards, pulling up facial recognition data. "Confirmed. These are subjects from failed enhancement trials, supposedly deceased according to official records. Someone just turned them loose on the city." "It's a demonstration," Steve realized. "Webb is showing us what happens when enhancement goes wrong, the chaos that unstable super soldiers can create." On the screen, emergency responders were trying to evacuate civilians, while military units established a perimeter around the attackers. But conventional weapons were useless against enhanced individuals. The soldiers were brave, but they might as well have been firing spitballs at a hurricane. "We have to go," Sam said, already reaching for his wings. "Wait." Steve held up a hand. "This is exactly what Webb wants. He creates a crisis that only enhanced individuals can solve, then offers to create more enhanced individuals to prevent future crises. So we let San Francisco burn." Tony's faceplate snapped down. "Not happening." Steve watched the news coverage, seeing the fear in civilian faces, the desperation of first responders trying to save lives with inadequate tools. Every instinct screamed at him to grab his shield and race to the rescue. That was what Captain America did. That was who he was. But Webb was counting on that response. He was manipulating Steve's heroic nature, using it as a weapon against him. The game was rigged, and the only way to win was not to play. "We go," Steve decided, "but we do it smart. This isn't just a rescue mission. It's intelligence gathering. We need to understand how these unstable soldiers were created, who released them, and how to counter the technology." As the Quinjet lifted off toward San Francisco, Steve stared out at the darkening sky and wondered if he was making the right choice. Webb's offer remained on the table, seductive in its promise of shared burden and enhanced capability. But every compromise with evil, no matter how small, left a mark on the soul. Steve had seen too many good people lose themselves in the gray areas between right and wrong, justifying increasingly questionable actions in service of noble goals. The question was whether he could afford to maintain his principles when the stakes were measured in innocent lives and the survival of human civilization. Behind them, the sun set like a dying ember, casting long shadows across a world that might never be safe again. San Francisco burned beneath a blood-red sky as the Quinjet descended toward the chaos. From above, the destruction looked almost artistic. Geometric patterns of collapsed buildings, streams of fleeing civilians flowing through streets like human rivers, emergency lights painting the smoke in shades of blue and red. But Steve knew the reality was far uglier than the aerial view suggested. The 6 unstable super soldiers had carved a path of devastation through the financial district that defied comprehension. Buildings that had stood for decades were reduced to rubble. Cars had been thrown blocks away from their original positions, crumpled like paper toys. The death toll was climbing by the minute. Energy readings are off the charts, Tony reported as they approached the landing zone. These subjects are burning through their enhanced metabolism at an unsustainable rate. They're literally consuming themselves from the inside out. Steve watched one of the attackers through the Quinjet's cameras. The figure had once been human, but the failed enhancement process had transformed him into something monstrous. His muscles bulged grotesquely, his veins glowed with unnatural light, and his movements were erratic, violent, without purpose beyond destruction. This was Webb's failed experiment unleashed on innocent people, a demonstration of what happened when the super soldier process went wrong, timed perfectly to coincide with his ultimatum to Steve. They landed in Union Square, where National Guard units had established a command post. General Patricia Hayes met them at the perimeter, her face grim with exhaustion and barely contained fury. "Captain Rogers, thank God you're here. We've got 6 enhanced hostiles moving through the financial district like a pack of rabid animals. Conventional weapons are useless, and they're showing no signs of fatigue." "Casualties?" Steve asked, though he dreaded the answer. 43 confirmed dead, over 200 injured. The number keeps climbing. Hayes pointed toward the smoke-shrouded downtown area. "We've evacuated a 6-block radius, but these things keep expanding their territory. At this rate, they'll reach the residential districts within the hour." Steve studied the tactical displays, noting the attackers' movement patterns. They weren't random. Despite their apparent instability, the enhanced subjects were following some kind of program behavior, systematically destroying key infrastructure targets. "They're not just rampaging," he told his team. "They're being directed somehow. This is a controlled demolition disguised as chaos." Tony's scanners confirmed the suspicion. "I'm reading neural implants in all 6 subjects. Same technology we saw in Webb's lab, but modified for remote operation. Someone is puppeteering these poor bastards." The realization sent cold fury racing through Steve's veins. The 6 attackers weren't villains choosing destruction. They were victims of Webb's experiments, their minds hijacked and their bodies turned into weapons against their will. They had families, friends, lives that had been stolen and perverted for this demonstration. "Can you trace the control signal?" Steve asked. "Working on it." Tony's head tilted as his AI assistant processed incoming data. "The signal is bouncing off multiple satellites, but I think I can triangulate the source. It's coming from, that son of a bitch." On Tony's display, a map of the Bay Area appeared with a pulsing red dot indicating the signal's origin. The location made Steve's stomach drop. Alcatraz Island. The abandoned federal prison sat in the middle of San Francisco Bay like a concrete monument to human suffering, now serving as Webb's command center for his twisted demonstration. "He's watching," Steve said quietly. "Sitting out there on that rock, watching people die, collecting data on how we respond to enhanced threats." Another explosion echoed through the city as one of the unstable subjects hurled a police car through a bank window. On the news feed streaming to Tony's display, Steve could see civilians trapped in the upper floors of damaged buildings, emergency responders unable to reach them because the area was too dangerous. We need to split up, Steve decided. Tony, Sam, Natasha, contain the subjects. Save as many people as you can. Try not to kill them if possible. They're victims, not villains. Where are you going? Natasha asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. To end this. Steve looked toward the bay, where Alcatraz Island rose from the dark water, like a concrete cancer. Webb wants to make his point. I'll give him a chance to make it face to face. The stolen speedboat cut through San Francisco Bay's choppy waters, with Steve hunched over the controls, spray stinging his face as he pushed the engine to its limits. Behind him, the city continued to burn. Radio chatter from emergency responders filled the air with reports of destruction, casualty counts, and desperate calls for assistance. Alcatraz Island loomed larger as he approached, its imposing walls and guard towers dark against the night sky. But lights flickered in windows that should have been empty, and sophisticated communication equipment bristled from structures that hadn't seen technology more advanced than radio in decades. Steve beached the boat on the island's rocky shore and made his way up the narrow path toward the main prison complex. His enhanced hearing picked up the hum of generators, the soft whisper of climate control systems, the clicking of computer keyboards. Webb had transformed the abandoned prison into a high-tech command center, complete with satellite uplinks and enough computing power to coordinate his global network of enhancement facilities. The main entrance stood open, another invitation that felt like walking into a predator's mouth. But Steve had no choice. Every moment he delayed meant more innocent people died in San Francisco. Inside, the prison's central corridor had been transformed into something resembling a mission control center. Banks of monitors lined the walls, showing feeds from the San Francisco attack, data streams from enhancement facilities around the world, and detailed biological readings from the 6 unstable subjects wreaking havoc on the city. Webb stood in the center of it all, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the destruction play out in real time. He didn't turn when Steve entered, but his shoulders tensed slightly in acknowledgement. Captain Rogers, right on schedule. Call them off, Steve said, raising his shield. End this madness. I'm afraid I can't do that. The subjects are operating on pre-programmed behavioral patterns. Once activated, they'll continue until their enhanced metabolism burns itself out. Should be another 3 hours or so. Steve looked at the monitors showing the carnage in San Francisco. 3 more hours of destruction, hundreds more casualties, all to prove a point that could have been made with words instead of corpses. You're a monster. I'm a visionary. Webb finally turned, and Steve was shocked by the change in his appearance. The scientist looked haggard, almost skeletal, as if something was consuming him from within. Do you know what those subjects were before I enhanced them? Child molesters, serial killers, men and women who had forfeited their right to exist in civilized society. I gave them a chance to serve humanity one final time. You turned them into weapons. I turned them into tools. There's a difference. Webb gestured to the monitors. Look at your friends, Captain. Watch how they struggle against 6 unstable subjects. 6 failures from my early experiments. Now imagine what happens when a real threat arrives. Something cosmic, something beyond human comprehension. Your little team of heroes won't stand a chance. On the screens, Steve could see Tony and Sam working together to evacuate civilians from a collapsing building while one of the enhanced subjects rampaged through the lower floors. They were barely keeping up, and this was just a fraction of what they might face in a truly cosmic-level conflict. The offer still stands, Webb continued. Help me perfect the process. Share your genetic template, your quantum signature, everything that makes you special. In return, I'll create an army of Captain Americas, thousands of them, each one dedicated to protecting innocent lives. Under whose control? Does it matter? The goal is preservation of human life on a species level. Individual freedoms are a luxury we can't afford when extinction is the alternative. Steve thought about the Colonel Martinez and her hollow enthusiasm, the way she'd spoken about dying and being reborn as if it were a privilege rather than a tragedy. Was that the future Webb envisioned? Humanity preserved, but stripped of everything that made it human? Show me the real program, Steve said, not the sanitized version you presented before. I want to see what you're actually doing to these people." Webb smiled, the expression transforming his gaunt features into something predatory. "Follow me." They descended deeper into the prison complex, past cells that had once held some of America's most dangerous criminals. Now they contained something far worse. Webb's true laboratory occupied the entire lower level, a sprawling complex of medical equipment, computer servers, and containment units that hummed with barely contained energy. In the center of it all stood a massive cylindrical chamber, filled with the same blue-green fluid Steve had seen in Prague. But this one was different, larger, more sophisticated, and occupied. Steve's blood turned to ice as he recognized the figure suspended in the enhancement fluid. Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, his oldest friend, captured and transformed once again into someone else's weapon. "You bastard," Steve whispered, his grip tightening on his shield until his knuckles went white. "He volunteered," Webb said calmly. "Walked right into one of my facilities 3 days ago and asked to be part of the program. Said he was tired of being a victim of other people's experiments. This time, he wanted to choose his own transformation." The chamber's status displays showed Bucky's vital signs, his neural patterns, the quantum resonance that Webb claimed was the key to successful super soldier enhancement. But something was wrong. The readings fluctuated wildly, showing a system under tremendous stress. "The process isn't working," Steve realized. "His previous modifications are interfering with your enhancements." "A minor setback. We're learning from each failure, each death, each small step toward perfection." Webb moved to a control panel, his fingers dancing over holographic displays. "But with your cooperation, we could skip the trial and error phase. Your genetic template would provide the missing piece of the puzzle." On the monitors above, the San Francisco attack continued. Steve watched his friends risking their lives to save innocent people while he stood in a madman's laboratory, staring at his best friend's unconscious form suspended in alien technology. The choice was simple and terrible. Help Webb perfect his process, and Bucky might survive. Refuse, and watch his oldest friend die as another failed experiment. But agreeing would mean enabling the creation of an army of enhanced soldiers with questionable free will, potentially dooming humanity to a future of controlled evolution. "Time's running out, Captain," Webb said softly. "For your friend, for the people of San Francisco, for our entire species. The cosmic threats are coming whether we're ready or not. At least this way, we have a fighting chance." Steve looked at Bucky's face, peaceful in artificial sleep, unaware of the choice being made on his behalf. How many times had his friend been transformed against his will? How many times had he been turned into someone else's weapon? But this time was different. This time, according to Webb, Bucky had chosen his fate. Steve raised his shield and made his decision. The vibranium disc struck the enhancement chamber's main power, coupling with pinpoint precision, sending sparks cascading across the laboratory. Alarms began blaring as backup systems engaged, but the damage was done. The enhancement process ground to a halt, the blue-green fluid draining from the chamber as Bucky's unconscious form was lowered to a medical bed. "You've killed him," Webb snarled, lunging for the emergency controls. The process was almost complete. Another few hours, and he would have been perfect. "He's already perfect," Steve replied, checking Bucky's vital signs. "Weak but stable. Alive. He doesn't need to be enhanced to be my friend." Webb's face twisted with rage and something that might have been grief. "You don't understand. None of you understand. I've seen the future, Captain. I've seen what's coming for us. Entities that devour planets like snacks. Cosmic forces that remake reality on a whim. Your friendship won't matter when our entire species is reduced to cosmic dust." "Maybe not, but it matters now. That's enough." Steve lifted Bucky in his arms and started toward the exit. Behind him, Webb was already activating emergency protocols, probably preparing to relocate his operation to another site. The man was relentless, driven by a vision of the future that justified any present atrocity. But as they reached the surface, Steve's communicator crackled to life with Tony's voice. "Cap, where are you? The subjects just shut down." All 6 of them, simultaneously. They're alive but unconscious. Looking back toward Alcatraz, Steve realized what had happened. Destroying the enhancement chamber had severed Webb's control over the subjects in San Francisco. Without the remote override, their program behavior had ceased, leaving them as confused and traumatized individuals rather than living weapons. The speedboat ride back to San Francisco gave Steve time to think about everything he'd seen and learned. Webb's vision of enhanced humanity was seductive in its scope, terrifying in its implications. But it was built on a foundation of coercion and control, stripping away everything that made people human in order to save humanity itself. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to preserve the species, Webb would have destroyed everything worth preserving about it. As the San Francisco skyline came into view, Steve looked down at Bucky's unconscious form and made a silent promise. No more transformations. No more experiments. No more turning people into weapons, no matter how noble the supposed cause. The cosmic threats would come eventually. When they did, humanity would face them as itself, flawed, mortal, stubbornly individual, but ultimately free to choose its own destiny. That freedom, Steve realized, was worth any price, even if the price was everything.